This happened on New Year's Eve, 2025. I'm from Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, and I was flying home after finishing a semester at the University of Rochester. I had to stay on campus for a week after the semester ended for personal reasons, so unfortunately, I spent Christmas alone. The flight was fine, but I was in a bad mood before I got on the plane. I'm a huge Browns fan, and when I was at the airport, the Browns had lost their last game of the regular season, 0-16, a complete no-win. And as a longtime fan, it was a particular pain. I think we were the first team to not win since the 80s or something. My flight was delayed, which ruined my family's plans for that evening. Originally, we were all supposed to drive to my cousin's house for a New Year's Eve and Holy Night party, but because of the delay, my parents decided to leave early and take the main car. I had to drive the backup car alone. My mom tried to make it up to me by leaving Ver, or the golden retriever, behind to keep me company. Not fun to travel alone, but Ver is always good company. I figured I would make the most of the trip. By the time Uber dropped me off at the airport, it was almost 10 o'clock. I didn't even bother unpacking. I just stuffed everything in the car, Ver locked the house, and hit the road. The trip itself was nothing special, just miles of rural Ohio winding through open fields and patches of forest. Not much snow on the ground, just a thin layer of dust. It was great because I hate driving in the snow. It was pitch black, although the only light came from my headlights and occasionally from the farmhouse with its porch light flickering in the distance. About halfway through, Vera started whining. At first I thought she just wanted attention, but then she got up and paced back and forth in the passenger seat. That's when I realized she needed to go to the bathroom. I whined, knowing there was nothing I could do but pull over. The next clearing I came across was small, barely enough room for the car, but had to. Do I remember realizing it was actually dark out there? If it wasn't for the white patches of snow here and there, I probably wouldn't have been able to watch into the woods at all. I put my hands in my pockets and tried my best not to freeze to death. Ver didn't seem to care about the cold or the darkness, like a classic golden retriever. I let her go, not even bothering to put her on a leash. She sniffed around the edge of the tree leisurely. She didn't wander far enough to relieve herself, and that's when I suddenly heard a loud noise. The crash echoed from somewhere in the woods, not just the sound of a branch snapping, but it was heavier and released as if someone or something that is moving through the trees. The loud noise made me jump like a grown man running through the woods. I tried to look around in the darkness but could only see a few rows of trees because it was too dark. Before I could react, Vera ran straight into the woods, and it was the worst nightmare I had ever had. She disappeared and I lost track of her in an instant. I kept calling her name but got no response. My heart was pounding while the cold was overwhelming and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Unable to leave Vera there, I ran into the woods aimlessly, screaming for her. I didn't dare think about what Vera might be chasing, just running with adrenaline guiding me, with the weak light from the flashlight on my phone and the thin snow underfoot. The darkness almost made me hit the trees. I ran and prayed that I would find Vera before anything scary came close. When my lungs were about to give out from the cold, I was forced to stop and rest, leaning against a nearby tree, feeling like I was about to collapse. I really didn't know what to do, and finally saw Vera, hunched over, trembling as she approached. She looked completely different, with her tail tucked between her legs. I knelt down and hugged her tightly, a sense of relief flooding through me. But when I realized that the situation was very dangerous, that there was still something mysterious lurking in the dark forest, I stood up and told Vera to follow me. This time, she obediently stayed by my side, as if entrusting her life to me. When I returned to the car, I wasn't sure if I was going in the right direction. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, a crash behind me startled me. Without thinking, both Vera and I started running, praying that we wouldn't trip. The crash seemed to follow closely behind, creating a feeling of extreme fear, as if death was approaching. By some miracle, Vera led the way and brought me back to the car safely. I threw her in and closed the car door as I jumped into the driver's seat. Looking back at the woods, my heart sank as I saw 3 figures standing silently watching me. I put the key in and drove straight ahead without stopping or slowing down. It took me a long way to calm down a bit before I realized Vera was bleeding. I immediately braked and went around the back of the car to the trunk, remembering that my mother always kept a first aid kit in the car. This time, her careful preparation paid off as I tried to treat Vera's wound as best I could, even though she was groaning in pain. For the first time since it all started, I felt myself starting to relax now that everything had ended safely. Even though I tried not to think about what had happened the rest of the way, I was still shocked that this had actually happened. In the end, I didn't tell my parents or anyone else about what had happened. For some reason, it seemed better to keep it to myself. New Year's Eve a few years ago still haunts me, as I was on my way to my parents' house to celebrate the New Year in northern Pennsylvania. I had planned to arrive early and take my time, but what should have been a simple trip turned into a disaster. I am a person who really enjoys long drives. A peaceful journey can give me the space I need to think. However, the weather put a damper on my plans when it started snowing about an hour into the drive. At first, the weather was not a concern, just a light drizzle rolling down the windshield. I thought the snow was pretty, but I knew I had gotten myself into trouble. The further we drove, the thicker the snow fell. Eventually, I found myself in the middle of a real snowstorm. The highway became slippery and visibility was almost zero. My car is a small car and not designed for snow, so when the wheels started slipping even on small hills, I knew I had to It was not worth risking my life for a mistaken planning. I found a safe enough space on the side of the road to avoid other cars. I then texted my parents about the current situation, causing them great concern. Although I tried to reassure them that everything would be okay, I wasn't sure. I decided to wait it out in the hope that things would calm down soon, but the snow continued to fall heavily. After about an hour of holding out, I realized I wasn't going to be able to get anywhere that night. Dad offered to come help, but I advised him not to risk it. I told him that if the situation continued, I would call the police. Without AAA, my only option was to wait it out myself or call the police if it was too dangerous. Staying in the car overnight made me uneasy. I was worried about running out of gas trying to stay warm and about damaging the battery if I left the lights or heater on for too long. While I turned the engine off and on to save fuel, the wind howled outside. I felt a heavy sense of isolation as I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the lights piercing the storm from behind. A snowplow pulled up beside me, and, as if saved, I rolled down my window. The driver was an older man, in his late 50s with a weathered look. He wore a thick coat and a black woolen cap that covered his ears. His face was wrinkled, somewhat aged from years of exposure to harsh conditions. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, he finally asked if I was okay. His voice was hoarse like a regular smoker's, and frankly, a little hard to hear. I told him I didn't think my car could handle the conditions, trying to sound friendly but keeping my tone calm. He nodded, saying that in a storm like this, it wouldn't get very far, especially with my car. He paused for a moment as if considering something. I noticed his eyes darting around the back seat of the car as if searching for something. As I was about to reply, he offered me a ride. I hesitated. I didn't know him and felt a little strange, but I could sense his sincerity. Plus, leaving the car overnight in this weather wasn't good either. I asked if he could take me where I was, and he said no problem. I asked what I should do with my car, and he just shrugged and said leave it. After a while, I agreed to leave the car, grabbed my bag, and climbed into the tractor's cab. The initial warmth was pleasant, and I felt the tension in my shoulders ease as I lay down. He asked me where I was going, and I told him about my parents' house. I gave him directions, and he nodded but said nothing more. The silence wasn't awkward, but as the minutes passed, the unease grew as I realized we weren't going in the right direction. The navigation system was pointing in the opposite direction, and the road we were on was a local road with only two directions. Trying to stay calm, I asked as naturally as possible about our direction. However, I sensed a slight change in his demeanor as he replied that we would take a short detour because the back roads would be better than the highway. I didn't know the area well enough to argue, but the way he said it made me feel uneasy. We drove for a while longer and he left the highway and started driving on the back roads. Even though the GPS was still pointing in the right direction, there was a sense of unease in my heart that made me more alert. As I looked around the cabin, warning signs were everywhere. Empty liquor bottles rolled across the floor near his feet, tattered maps stuffed into side pockets, and I caught a glimpse of a knife stuck between the seats. My heart pounded with anxiety as the GPS kept recalibrating as he steered without looking. In my panic, I spotted a house in the distance, the only one Miles could see, and took it as an escape route. When I got closer, I took a deep breath, gripped the handle, and kicked the door open. The cold air hit me in the face, but I didn't stop, falling to the ground, my leg aching but ignoring it. I got up and ran toward the house, ignoring the screams behind me. I looked back to see him fumbling with something in the glove box, probably looking for a gun. Without looking back, I dashed into the snow, trying not to slip until I reached the house. Knocking on the door for help, a man and woman opened the door and pulled me inside. I collapsed to the floor, caught my breath, told them what had happened, and they didn't ask any more questions but called the police. When they got there, the snowplow was gone. They said they would keep an eye out and search the area, but finding him in the snowstorm would be difficult. They offered to take me to my parents' house and even call a tow truck for me. I'm so grateful that my dad was furious when he found out. And I've never driven in the snow since. I always wonder what would have happened if I hadn't jumped out of the car when I did. Even in college, I was never much of a party person. The party culture wore me out quickly, and I realized that I was happier doing something meaningful with a few close friends. My friends are from rural northwestern Ontario. This is a story from a few years ago, when I was a kid. My dad and his group of friends had a New Year's Eve tradition of going ice fishing while everyone else was celebrating. My mom didn't get to join in, and there wasn't much of an extended family, so I grew up spending New Year's Eves on a frozen lake in a cold place with my dad, uncle, brother, and dad's friends. Even though my dad passed away and my brother moved to Chicago years ago, I still try to go ice fishing to celebrate New Year's Eve. I feel a responsibility to keep the tradition going. My two best friends, Nate and Trevor, are athletic guys, more like people who are more in touch with nature than society, honestly. That's how I describe myself. The three of us try our best to keep the tradition going because spending time on New Year's Eve really makes sense. Nate was driving that day. His truck was just right for the job. Big tires, four-wheel drive, and plenty of room for all our gear. We were fully prepared: fishing rods, bait, a sled to haul everything, and a small shelter to protect us from the harsh cold. The weather forecast was clear, but in Ontario you can never trust the weather forecast. We packed up and headed for a little-known lake. That's what we liked about it. It was tucked away in dense trees with a frozen surface even in mild winters. As Nate drove through the snow-covered roads, the excitement was palpable. There's something so quiet and peaceful about ice fishing. Just you, your friends, and the promise of a catch, unlike drinking beer at some bar. As we pulled up near the trailhead, I noticed a guy standing a few feet away. He was dressed in heavy winter gear, but something about him just didn't feel right. He just stood there staring at our truck. At first I thought he might be a fisherman sizing us up, but then I saw him constantly glancing at his phone. I felt a little weird, so I muttered to my friends that this guy scared me. They both looked up. Trevor shrugged and Nate nodded without saying anything. As we were getting ready to unload, the man suddenly rushed over, waving his arms wildly. I rolled down the window to hear him yelling that we needed help because his friend had just fallen on the ice. He pointed at his phone and looked panicked, his desperation obvious. Trevor didn't pull the curtain up and we all chased after the man as he led the way toward the lake. We ran along the trail without even bothering to put on our jackets, the urgency in his voice overpowering any second thoughts. The man was practically sprinting, forcing us to keep up. As we neared the lake, I realized something was wrong. He wasn't taking us to our usual fishing spot, but to the far end of the shore where the ice was thinner. I was about to stop, but it was too late. They appeared before we could do anything. Two men were standing near the edge of the lake. They weren't wearing fishing gear, and they weren't moving. They were just standing there waiting. When I looked down at their hands, I felt a chill run down my spine as both of their arms were covered in blood. One of them yelled at us to stop right there, and as we got closer, he raised his gun and pointed it at me. Honestly, I can't describe what it feels like to have a gun pointed at you. Hopefully, no one else has to go through that. My heart sank when I saw the man we were following turn around and look at us with a creepy smirk. We were trapped. The second man demanded all the keys and everything we had with us. There was no other choice because they were clearly not kidding. Nate reached into his pocket and threw them the truck keys. Then the three of us searched our pockets. I was gonna keep my phone, but one of the guys demanded it too. Nate said his phone was in the car and they laughed about it. I had never felt so angry in my life. How could we have been so stupid? My fists clenched, wishing those guys didn't have weapons. I would have taken them all out in a heartbeat. They took everything and forced us back onto the road at gunpoint before one of the guys took off in Nate's car while the other two backed into the woods, presumably to their own. I debated whether or not to chase them, but figured it wouldn't help. We stood there for a moment, shaking, before Nate suddenly pulled out his phone. I knew he had lied about leaving it in the car, and I really didn't know what we would have done if he hadn't thought of this. He quickly got up and called the police, which we somehow managed to get a signal for. He explained the situation as best he could, and the dispatcher told us to stay put. We huddled together to keep warm while we waited for help to arrive. I was still furious, Nate being the angriest as he kicked a nearby tree and cursed repeatedly. There was nothing Trevor or I could do to calm him down. It had all happened so fast, and honestly, I was still trying to process the horror of it all. New Year's Eve, in the middle of nowhere, it was beyond our expectations. In the end, I'll skip the unnecessary details. The police took the report and took us to Trevor's house, which was about as close as you can get. Nate's car was never found, and the men were never arrested. The three of us still couldn't believe what had happened. Trevor thought that maybe it was just an unfortunate coincidence and that they didn't mean to rob us, but that we just happened to be the perfect target at the wrong time. While that seemed plausible, it was hard to believe that someone would set up such a perfect trap in such a remote place without being sure who would show up. Honestly, I didn't know what to make of the whole thing.